Hey everyone, that was the solo and outro coda slide work by the late great Duane Allman on Eric Clapton and Derek and the Dominos' Layla, coming in at number 14 on Guitar World Magazine's Top 100 Solos of All Time. By the way, when is Guitar World Magazine going to start paying me for all this free promotion I'm giving them every week? Soon, I hope. They actually wrote a small article on their website about my little project last year. So that was very nice of them and pretty cool. So gave my channel a bit of a boost for a few days. I'll link it down below if you want to go and check it out. So anyway, I've been in lockdown isolation because of this goddamn coronavirus, COVID-19. Stuck in the apartment with my wife and son for the past 3 weeks, not unlike a hell of a lot of other people out there. And with regards to that, I read an article a few weeks ago about how the divorce rates in China have skyrocketed because of all the time couples were forced to spend together at home in isolation. Makes sense, I suppose. So, trying my best to head that off, I said to my wife a couple of weeks ago, I said, this is not going to be easy. So, we have to do our very best to try and get along over the next couple of weeks or months, if need be, if we're going to stay sane and together. So, and thankfully, we've been doing great, I have to say. I've been doing my best not to be an idiot, and she's been as great as usual. Except for one afternoon. One afternoon, it almost came to a head between us, and here's why. You see, she was busy playing with our son in his play area, and I took that as an opportunity to get a little guitar practice in. So I sat down and I grabbed my slide and started working on my slide guitar. Now, a few months ago, I learned the fundamentals so I could do the solo to Sharp Dressed Man by ZZ Top. But that's pretty basic slide work. It's basically beginner slide type of stuff. Now, Layla, while not the pinnacle of slide guitar, is much more advanced than Sharp Dressed Man and much more involved. So I would need to get much better at it than I was if I was going to tackle Layla and do it any sort of justice. So after about 15 minutes of practice, she comes over, lifts the headphone off my ear, and says, "What the hell are you doing?" And I said, "I'm learning slide." I said, "Slide guitar." And she said, "Well, stop it. It's annoying as hell." "But I have to learn Layla," I said, to which she replied, "I don't care what you have to learn. I can't listen to that racket. Wee, 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 wee," over and over and over again. It sounds like two cats locked in a fight to the death. To which I said, "Okay, honey," and I put my guitar down because I wanted to live. So for the past 2 weeks, my slide guitar practice has been pretty much limited to late nights after everyone has gone to bed. Like now, for instance. Crisis averted. That said, I can certainly sympathize. However, there's few sounds in this world more annoying than the sound of someone learning slide guitar. Learning violin, I suppose, but not much else. And it's bloody hard to do. I didn't realize how precise slide guitar is. Now, the basic fundamental of slide guitar is that you play over the fret wires and not over the frets. So you've been reduced from to a margin of error from about here like an inch, inch and a half, up here half an inch, to basically an eighth of an inch, basically when you're playing over the fret wires. Any slight deviation left or right, you're either sharp or you're flat, or you've got buzz, or sometimes you don't get a note at all. Furthermore, and as the name slide guitar suggests, one is sliding in and out of these notes for the most part, making that precision even more difficult. And also with Layla, there's a number of times you're actually playing well above the fret markers, way up here. And, you're trying to line up with the pickup screws and the pickup casing and not easy stuff to do, but fun as hell to play. Now, I know I may get a few comments about my technique and how my technique may not be 100% correct, or that Duane Allman picked with his fingers, not with a guitar pick, so on and so forth. But I did my best with the 2 weeks that I gave myself to learn slide guitar, and I think it sounds pretty decent in the end, correct technique or not. I like to use my pinky for doing my slide work. Nothing wrong with that, I suppose. I think there's lots of players out there that use their pinky. Most, I think, use their ring finger, but I like my pinky, and I chose to use a pick because I just felt more comfortable with a pick. I suppose I could have done it because I know how to finger pick. Anyway, now on to a little bit about Layla, the song. Layla was initially written as a ballad, a love letter of sorts to Clapton's good friend George Harrison's wife, Pattie Boyd, who Clapton was madly in love with but couldn't have. Because, well, she was married to George Harrison. Were they having an affair behind George's back? Some say they were. Others say they weren't. Clapton said they weren't, but who knows? But eventually George and Pattie divorced, and Eric finally got his Layla all to himself, and somehow remained good friends with George Harrison throughout this whole mess. Harrison often referring to Clapton as his husband-in-law, and actually attended Eric and Pattie's wedding in 1979, a marriage that would last 9 years before Eric and Pattie called it quits as well in 1988. Anyway, back to our story. With the disbanding of Cream, Eric Clapton put together a new band called Derek and the Dominos, wrote some material, and headed to Miami to record what would become the double album Layla and Other Assorted Love Songs. While in Miami, word got to Duane Allman that Clapton was in town recording. As Duane was a huge fan of Eric Clapton, he asked the studio producer, sound engineer Tom Dowd, if it would be possible to meet Eric Clapton. Though nowhere near at the time the international star that Clapton was at this point, Clapton was well aware of who Duane Allman was and knew his work quite well, especially Duane's solo work on Wilson Pickett's cover of the Beatles' Hey Jude, which Clapton had called the greatest R&B guitar solo that he had ever heard. So he was overjoyed to meet, sit down, and trade ideas with the great American guitarist. Well into the night, the first night they met, well into the night they would jam and bounce ideas off one another during their first meeting. And producer Tom Dowd would have this to say about the collaboration a few years later in an interview. There had to be some sort of telepathy going on because I've never seen spontaneous inspiration happen at that rate and level. One of them would play something and the other reacted instantaneously. Never once did either of them have to say, could you play that again, or I didn't quite get that. It was like two hands in a glove, and they got on tremendously. Clapton would invite Duane Allman to sit in and take part in the recording of the album, which up to this point only had 3 tracks completed. Layla being one of the later tracks that they finished. I think it was the last track that they actually recorded for the album. Duane would skip out on a couple of Allman Brothers gigs, hang out in the studio for a week and a half, and would go on to play on the rest of the tracks, basically becoming a 5th member of the group for a short period of time, joining Clapton, keyboardist Bobby Whitlock, bassist Carl Rattle, and drummer Jim Gordon. Speaking of Jim Gordon, he has an interesting story all to himself. Plagued with mental illness in the following years, Jim Gordon would infamously go on to bludgeon his mother to death with a hammer and finish her off with a knife during a psychotic break in, I think it was 1988 or 1978, something like that. Anyway, charged with second-degree murder. Of course, he would be sent to prison where he still is to this very day. If he ever does get out of prison, he'll have 50 years of royalties from Layla coming to him if he ever does get out, because he wrote the coda. Anyway, continuing. Though, like I said, Duane Allman would play on the majority of the tracks on the album. No song on the album would Allman leave his mark more so than on the title track Layla. Allman was not really noted as a songwriter per se, having only one songwriting credit on the three Allman Brothers albums up to that point. The lovely acoustic instrumental Little Martha from their third album, Eat a Peach. However, he would take Clapton's Layla, like I said, at this point a ballad, rework it and turn it into a rock and roll song, creating and playing the famous opening riff and increasing the pace of the song, giving it its much more up-tempo feel. Along with adding his formidable slide guitar skills to the song and the solo, which I just tried my best to replicate, he was a key part in creating one of the most famous songs and solos in the history of rock and roll. Duane Allman would also add his slide work, albeit quite low in the mix and slightly out of tune, to the 3-minute plus coda tacked on to the end of Layla that I'm sure you're familiar with. The coda was written, like I said, by drummer and mother killer Jim Gordon, and was apparently stolen from his girlfriend at the time, singer-songwriter Rita Coolidge, who was infuriated actually when she first heard it for the first time. Now, personally, while I like the coda, it's very pretty, it gets really repetitive after a while, and I think it just goes on absolutely far too long. It's longer than the bloody song itself, for crying out loud. It was actually recorded 3 weeks after the initial track was recorded and amended to Layla, the song Layla, before the album's release, and for some reason was sped up in post-production, which caused me personally no small amount of aggravation in trying to get in tune with the bloody thing. Both parts of the song actually are sped up from standard, and both to different pitches. The main body of the song was sped up slightly over standard tuning, and the coda was sped up even more than that. Just a pain in the ass. Because like I said, and despite the fact that the tune was sped up, Duane Allman was not in tune during the recording of the coda, but his playing on that track is so famous and ingrained in that song that it's kind of become what it is, in tune or not. So I had a really hard time finding the proper tuning. If I was perfectly in tune with it, it sounded a bit off because it wasn't the same as the recording. If it was sharp or a bit flat, it still didn't quite sound right. Bizarre, I finally said the hell with it, and I got it as close as my ear could get it. Let me know what you think. Drop a comment because I'm at a loss. Am I in tune? I don't know. Now, I'm not certain of this, but I think because of the tuning issue, that's maybe the reason why sound engineer and producer Tom Dowd probably dropped it so low in the mix during the coda, but don't quote me on that. Regardless, it's gone on to be one of the most famous songs of all time and one of the most famous solos on this list. And because of its inclusion, I think I can now say that I know how to play slide guitar, at least a little bit. It doesn't scare me so much anymore, at the very least. And I think that's all I got to say about that one. That's all. That was a long one. It was tough. It was, a really good challenge, and that's what this project's all about, learning new things on my part. I hope you liked it. It was a lot of work to put together and remember it all. Hope you're well in your little guitar corner of the world. Hope you're all staying safe and virus-free out there. Just want to thank the great people of Reddit and Our Guitar for all their support over the past few years on this project. Thank you, Our Guitar. You're awesome. If you're subscribed to my channel, thank you very much. If you're not subscribed to my channel, what is wrong with you? Click that subscribe button and hit the little bell and you'll know when I upload a new video. So I think that's all I got to say. So you guys take care of yourselves, and we'll see you next time with some Stevie Ray Vaughan and some slow blues with Texas Flood. I'm looking forward to that. So we'll see you next week. Hopefully, won't be too much longer than a week to get that one down. And take care of yourselves. Ciao.